Good morning once again, and welcome to the JKMRC Friday Seminar series. Before we begin, on behalf of the University of Queensland and the Sustainable Minerals Institute, we'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants, and who continue cultural and spiritual connection with country, and we recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. So one of the great challenges facing the mining industry today is being able to fill the metal supply deficits that our changing global economy is creating. While there are processes within the circular economy model that facilitate this, such as recycling, tailings and wastewater reprocessing, to name a couple, it's the discovery of new mineral deposits that's required to meet the forthcoming step changes in metal demand. By and large, it's junior exploration companies who are doing that work. And year by year, their job is getting harder as they are required to come up with new exploration models and new strategies to be successful. To that end, it's my great pleasure today to introduce David A-Izzeddin. David's a geologist with over 30 years experience in exploration, mining and business development, and he's worked extensively in North Queensland, being a member of the team that discovered the 1 million ounce Mount Wright gold deposit. He's worked in many other districts, both in Australia and overseas as well. David is one of the founders and the technical director for Ballymore Resources and is actively exploring in North Queensland. His presentation today is entitled Rediscovering and Reinventing North Queensland Mines. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. Look, as Tom's saying, I've been, I guess, almost a veteran at this stage in my life, working around North Queensland. I've been working there since 1990. It's an area that I've got a great love for. I've been involved with some fantastic groups. So I've worked with Dominion, Ross Mining, and MIM in the early 90s through North Queensland, and I was lucky enough to be part of a very successful group at MIM that, found Mount Wright, Sarsfield, Nolans, and also Area 2, which, while it doesn't really make it onto too many of the stories, was probably one of the more fun ones to look at. It was a really exciting little high-grade project. I guess in my travels, I've got to see a lot of really exciting things in Queensland, and certainly being active in the early 90s in North Queensland was a very exciting time to be around. We saw so many great discoveries in that time. I subsequently went on and became the district geologist in Mount Isa, which allowed me to play with some of the God's great deposits up there. And basically since then I've come back after many years away. And as Tom said, we've started a company called Ballymore to look for, test some of these opportunities in North Queensland. So today, look, I apologise, it's probably not going to be as technical as some of your other talks that you'd probably hear, but I'm really going to be probably giving you a few of my homespun ideas about what the opportunities and what some of the challenges are in North Queensland. So look, very quickly about Ballymore, we only listed in 2021. Probably 2 years before that, we pulled together a group of projects which we were quite excited about in this area, and I will go into why we've come into this area and what the reason behind it was. But at the moment, our key projects are Mount Wright, which is about 50 kilometres northwest of Cairns, a VHMS copper deposit. We've got some ground around Chiligo at Rediscovering. We've got a nice little tenement package at Ravenswood around Charters Towers. And we also have some ground at Prospine called the Dittmer Project. We've come into this area because we do see there's some great metal endowment, some real opportunities in this part of the world. But also, I think in terms of the opportunity here, we came in there looking for copper and gold, but fortunately in this part of the world, we invariably find other minerals with them and other commodities. And really, we're looking at old areas and looking to modernise them and test them with modern techniques. To look at Queensland, as I say, we came in here because we thought this was a bit of an untapped treasure in terms of an area for exploring. It was thriving in the 1970s through the 1990s. I came in the 1990s, and back then Townsville had all the majors were there. You had your BHPs, your CRAs, your Battle Mountains, all these big boys were there, as well as MIM, and plus lots of juniors and mid caps. And there was a really real buzz about the place. There was always work going on, some really great stuff. And as I've already mentioned, some really exciting discoveries found during that period of time. It still went a bit before the 90s, but then your Osborne, Kitson was a bit before too, but Mount Lation, Tick Hill, Pachingo, Cannington, Century, Ernest Henry, the A-Izzeddins, the 3,000, 3,500 were really only recognised then. Mount Wright, Nolans and Sarsfield all came up in that sort of window. And so, look, there was a very good reason why there was a lot of activity back then. But for whatever reason, many of the companies, particularly the majors, pulled out of North Queensland in the latter half of the 1990s. And we saw a real dramatic drop off in exploration. We probably, until very recently, haven't seen it really claw its way back to those sort of levels again. Since then, really, the focus in Queensland has very much been, for very good reason, the Mount Isa Inlier, but also in the Bowen Basin coal. In that time frame, since the 90s, in the last 30 years, we've obviously seen some pretty substantial changes. I don't really need to tell anyone about what commodity prices have done in that time. When I was working for business development in Xstrata Copper, I was so excited the day that we got told we could use a long-term copper price of more than 75 cents a pound for evaluating projects. And I guess my first little homespun sort of home truth about evaluating, exploring, and looking to buy a project is the person who buys that big project is the guy who's got the most optimistic outlook on what the copper price. It doesn't matter how clever you are and what sneaky things you think you can do to improve a project. If you think copper is going to be 75 cents a pound and someone thinks it's going to be $1.25, they're going to be always prepared to pay more for it, and you're not going to get it. So there's obviously been, as I say, not only have we seen commodity prices improve, but there's obviously been some really fantastic improvements in technologies that we use. It's not just that they're new technologies necessarily, but we've actually managed to get them to a point where things are readily available and cheap to use, basically. And things like multi-element analysis, portable XRF machines, things like that have really fundamentally changed the way we do business. And the last but not least, obviously, there's also been some fantastic research done by groups such as this, and also, a lot of people throughout the country that are and overseas, which are helping improve our understanding of the geological models that we're using to explore. Look, the reality is Queensland, if you're looking for metals, you're probably at this point still very much focused on outcropping bits of basement, which are of great interest to us. Mount Isa Inlier is obviously the pretty obvious one. But also we have this nice slither of rock running up the east coast there, which happens to also have some pretty impressive deposits on. My view, as I say, the thesis is that very much the focus has been, for very good reason, the Mount Isa Inlier. It's a world-class province. But there still are some really, really interesting areas. And so when we went about trying to put together some projects for Ballymore, we started to try and look at things we could use and things we could do to try and actually target in on priority areas that might be of interest to us. This is an example. In this case, we were basically looking at the number of workings per square metre, or square kilometre we could see in various rock types, see which rock types seem to be more, I guess, more fertile for things like copper and different things. And it's pretty clear from that once again, Mount Isa actually does have some very fertile rocks, as you'd expect. But then things like the Hodgson Basin is a very, very attractive area to be looking. Around parts of the Georgetown Inlier are. Some of the stuff, probably more so the VHMS material rocks down in the Langa province in Charters Towers. And then we also have some down the Yarra province. So this is one of the things that helped us to drive where we go looking. I've already laboured the point, but I'll just once again reiterate this northeast Queensland area. If we even take away the Mount Isa area, it still has remarkable amounts of metal in it, and given the lack of exploration in this area, we feel there's still plenty of upside in this area. Now, my next homespun little bit of talk is about how do you find a mine, and I've got a few little ideas I just wanted to share with that. First up, I'll say to me, to be successful as an explorer, you need to have 4 things going for you. First and foremost, you need luck. Secondly, you need an excellent team, and that team doesn't all have to be geniuses, but we need a really enthusiastic, single-minded team heading in the same direction, working together. As an old exploration manager said to me many years ago, you don't find mines, you build them, and you build them with blood, sweat and tears, and you have to work hard to get them. And I totally agree with that. So finding the right team that's got who are prepared to go that extra mile to find these things is how you find them. The other thing you need is obviously a good budget. If you don't have the money, you can't do the work, you won't find them. And secondly, you need a supportive management team that's prepared to back you and stick with you for the long haul, because once again, these things are invariably not something that are going to happen overnight. They're going to take time. There's several strategies for looking for mines that, well, at least this is how my view on the world. The first is obviously the first mover strategy, and that's obviously trying to be the first one in. invariably the big ones are the ones you generally find first, and that's mainly because they are more obvious, they stick out, and so people come across them. The issue, of course, with that strategy is that obviously when you're going in somewhere green, invariably they don't have the data sets you really want, so you have to create them all yourself, whether it's good geology, geochemical data sets, geophysical data sets. So it's an expensive, risky business, but the prize is big. You could argue at the moment, well, I think Queensland's a reasonably mature exploration terrain at this stage. I think hopefully by the time I finish this talk, you'll probably agree with me that it's probably not as mature as we all like to think it is. And there's a real opportunity, I think, for a lot more exciting opportunities here. But also, we're looking at an exciting change in the world at the moment with what's going on with the decarbonisation of the economy. There's a whole new set of elements and metals and things that we're chasing that really haven't been given the same level of attention. So even though these areas may well have been kicked and explored for quite a long while, the fact is they have not been looked for specifically for certain critical minerals and things that we're now looking for. I think we're going to see an amazing revolution in the next 10 years in particular as more data comes together and people start to build up these data sets and our understanding of the styles and what's going on. As that evolves, it's going to be a really exciting time. The next strategy is your elephant country strategy. Elephant country is the lazy one. If you're late to the party, you can't get in there early. The next best thing to next best thing to a mine is to look beside a mine and use their models, go and look at the same rocks and see if you can find more of the same. And that one, once again, is probably a lower risk one, but as I've already stated, more often than not, even if you find them, they tend to be smaller and there's still no guarantees they're going to be there because normally the guys who found the mine have normally already kicked those rocks as well. And the last is the new paradigm strategy, or is it the first mover strategy all over again? I don't know. It's really, and that's all about going into these same areas with a new paradigm, a new strategy or new technology. These are things that can fundamentally change the whole situation for you. And that could be anything from a new geological model that changes something for you. Suddenly you realize that this particular intrusive at this age is the thing that's driving all these things. Oh, there's one over there. Let's go and check that out. It could be coming up with a new geophysical technique, which suddenly allows you to look deeper or look elsewhere and find more of these things. And equally, commodity prices. Something that may have been uneconomic a few years ago is now suddenly looking quite attractive. So we will put the work into it. And really, that's what this little diagram is. Something I love, this particular diagram, which is showing the history of Chilean copper resources. And look, that first line there is basically the equivalent of the first mover situation. That's basically what ore bodies that are found that are outcropping in the first place. And as you can see, quite dramatic success with that. The yellow line there and the white one are basically examples of the elephant country strategy. This is where you apply that same model that they've applied to recognise these originals, and they've gone out and they've found a number of other exciting projects. And then last but not least, down here, the blue, the magenta and green, these are examples of where you've got the new strategy. And in those cases, it's people going undercover and looking and trying to explore undercover, or in the 90s, suddenly the realisation that some of these low-grade things that people had already recognised but really hadn't taken forward because the grade wasn't there, suddenly became economic with the advent of utilising SXEW as a means of processing these things. So I think that's a pretty good summary of the different approaches. In terms of us and what we did when we came in here, as I say, we'd already come to the conclusion that North Queensland was a bit of an unloved child since the 90s, and there was a real opportunity here. So basically, we went in there and we basically had a fairly simple set of criteria. Our main focus when we came in was looking very much for copper and gold. I'm very much of the view that copper and gold, as a company, a copper and gold mix is the best mix you can have from the point of view that when economies are booming, copper is basically going to be going strong. My indoctrination at working for Strata Copper for many years means that I've been for over 10 years an absolute unwavering believer in the potential of copper, and that's only got stronger over the last 10 years. There's a massive shortfall coming up, and we really need more of it. And how we're going to achieve that, I'm still not completely certain, being honest. But obviously, in those downtimes when things aren't so good, then it's always nice to have gold in your back pocket, because gold tends to be a nice little hedge for you. In times of uncertainty, gold price goes up, and so having that combination. Having said that, in North Queensland, we're very fortunate that when you go looking for those sort of things, you invariably find other minerals and things. And so there's a real mix in what we can identify. In other things we target, we're looking for old mining camps and areas of extensive workings that really just hadn't had anywhere near the level of work over a long time. And then feeding into that, we also look for large footprints. Anyone who's worked with me before has heard me bang on about footprints a lot. I'm a very big believer in whether it's a geochemical footprint, a geophysical footprint. A big footprint is hopefully a good indicator of something of significant size and potential. So really finding those, and whether that's evenly just large extensive zones of historic workings, that's also probably a de facto for geochem anyway. And once again, something that I think I'll hopefully demonstrate over this talk is that beyond that, looking for areas of limited modern exploration, and as they surprisingly in northeast Queensland, it's actually not that hard to find. And then last but not least, we also tried to find areas that were close to infrastructure because it makes operating a lot easier than going out and working in the middle of the desert or whatever. And also preferably close to an operating mine, which gave us the optionality to be able to take our production somewhere if we can't find something big enough to stand on its own 2 feet. I think we did a pretty good job, and so here's a few examples of some of the historic mines that we've managed to pick up in our tenement package. The one up the top here, Ruddigore, is the historic Ruddigore copper mine. It operated basically, I think, from 1904 to 1909. It was it's literally only located 5 kilometres from the Chiligo smelter. There's a series of shafts down to over 100 metres depth and some significant pits in this area. And when we first went out there, we were just surprised about how much oxide copper over a very extensive area was there. Historically, the grade it produced at was 3.9% copper, and it also had a bit of silver as a byproduct. Interestingly, also, it had 26 drill holes drilled into it for a sum total of 1,600 metres of drilling. So absolutely such a limited amount of drilling for this target. So we saw a real opportunity with it. The Mount Wright project, which is that VHMS target we picked up northwest of Cairns. It averaged 8.7% copper when it operated. It was founded in the late 1800s and it operated on and off a bit in the early 1900s. Once again, certainly a bit of drilling has been completed around the historic mine, but there's literally a corridor of it with a similar style of material in it that extends for at least 3 kilometres with a number of old 1970s EM conductors and geochem targets. Well, sadly, most of it hasn't been covered with geochemistry. There's already a number of other targets which just simply haven't had any work done on it, and we see a really exciting opportunity. The Scardens top camp, and there's also Scardens bottom camp, are 2 moly tungsten deposits that we have up near Chiligo. Once again, we've only just visited it for the first time, and for what it's worth, it's had no drilling into it ever. There's a number of shafts and pits along this thing, and there's some extensive zones of quartz veining on the edge of a granite with these moly tungsten targets in them. It's a really interesting project, and we'll go back. It's got a lot of similarities with Wolfram Camp, and we'll go back there and have a closer look at it. Maniapota is down south of Chiligo, and it basically sits on the same structural corridor as Red Dome and Mungana. Yeah, it's a very extensive skarn system on the contact between the granite and the sediments in that area in the Chiligo Formation. We have over 1 kilometre strike length of old historic workings along this contact. We've got a soil geochem anomaly that remains open to the north and south that extends for over 3 kilometres at this point. It's polymetallic, copper, lead, zinc, and gold. And most interesting for us in our recent mapping, we're actually starting to recognise these late stage dikes which we think have some similarities to what we see at Red Dome. So we intend to go back there, do an IP survey and do some drilling into this very shortly. There's only been historically a handful of shallow holes drilled under the main pits by Dominion in the 80s. They reported actually some pretty impressive lead zinc anomalies. Ironically, they 20% lead and zinc wasn't uncommon in them, but they were generally only narrow little zones. They walked away. Interestingly, they never tested for gold in those holes. Torby's Crooked Creek is also down near Almaden, down south of Chiligo. It's an old historic silver lead mine, averaged 15% lead and 435 grams silver. They stopped mining it because the lead started to turn into, there was a lot more sphalerite and zinc at depth. So they were burdened with the issue that they couldn't process the zinc, but they were reporting zinc grades up to 20% at the bottom of that mine. It's had 2 drill holes into it, which we believe have both been drilled the wrong way because it was drilled on the basis of this being a Mount Isa sedimentary hosted model, which once again, I don't even know if I'd agree with what they actually were using as their thesis. They were drilling across the stratigraphy, and I think it's clearly a structural thing. So we want to go back there. And last but not least, our Dittmer mine down near Proserpine. This was the highest grade gold mine in Australia when it operated. It averaged at about 5 ounces to the tonne, plus it has copper and silver with it. And it's never been drilled until we picked it up. So first I'm going to give you a little bit of a case study on Dittmer, because that's where our focus is at the moment. We are the largest tenement holder in this area. We were attracted to it because we could see there's a vast amount of workings in this area. It's remarkably underexplored, and we just saw there was a great opportunity here. It felt to me a lot like Ravenswood when MIM first went there. When MIM first went into Ravenswood, people were asking, what is a big company like MIM doing going into a place with this, where it's basically a bunch of little narrow high-grade veins? But there was a firm belief that there was potential around those big, or those little narrow veins to be bulk tonnage targets. And subsequently, so that's been proven to be the case. And Ravenswood now is the largest gold mine in Queensland. Gold was first discovered here in the 1890s, and once again, another learning from my time in Ravenswood is that cyanide was only introduced to Queensland actually in Ravenswood in the early 1900s. Anything earlier than that, they had a real problem with treating sulfide ore. So basically at Ravenswood, Nolans, the reason why we found Nolans where we did, there was huge amounts of workings. We all knew as geos there, if you want to go panning after work, you go down to Nolans Gully and there was always gold there. But it was the first place that they found, because they also found gold panning in that area. And there was pits and shafts everywhere, but they all stopped at 20 metres. And we probably didn't appreciate that until we started drilling it. But then there happened to be a significant gold deposit sitting underneath that. So anything that's in that 1880s, 1890s through to say 1910, 1920, there's a good chance that it hasn't actually been mined below the base of oxidation, and there's an opportunity right there. Numerous old historic workings, lots of extremely high-grade veins in this area. And the main one in particular, the biggest one being the Dittmer mine itself. Dittmer, as I say, it was actually it came late to the party. It was actually recognised in the 1930s, where after most of the mining had ceased. But it proved to be the highest grade gold mine in Australia when it operated between the 1930s and 50s. It averaged 151 grams gold, 66 grams silver, and 2.8% copper. And as I say, amazingly, this area, you're lucky to find a prospect here that's even had a rock chip sample collected on it. And Dittmer itself had never had a drill hole put into it. I always, to this day, I remain shocked about what people were thinking not to do more on this one. Having started work here, and obviously we gravitated to the Dittmer mine very quickly ourselves for good reason. But one thing we recognised very quickly is this particular area has very extreme terrain. By Australian standards, we are talking extremely steep slopes, very thick vegetation. It's a nightmare. We've got trees that bite you, stinging trees and things like that. It's a challenge. Our first 2 holes, we managed to drill them. We couldn't get them from optimal spots. The other problem we had is that where the ore body dips down this way, the hill goes up this way. So you're getting further and further away as you step away from the mine. So to actually drill those first 2 holes, both of them were 500-metre deep holes. We realised, and it's fair to say that while we hit the load, it's fair to say we didn't hit the load where we were actually aiming for, and both these holes went wildly off course. We knew we had a bit of a problem. From my time working in Fiji many years beforehand and having a similar situation there, we came to the realisation quite quickly there that it was more cost effective to put in an underground drive, set up drill platforms underground closer to your target and drill from there. And the cost of that development was far less than all the work having to drill extra metres from surface, and also just the sheer amount of carnage you have to create on the surface to achieve those drill platforms. So we looked at the old mine. It was all caved in and fallen in the front of this mine, but we managed to open it back up. Once we accessed the actual drive and the adit in there, the ground inside was pristine, but we managed to refurbish it, open it all up, set up drill platforms, and then that was really the game changer for us. The great advantage of opening up the old mine is it allowed us to get in there, do mapping, channel sampling, which helps us to understand the structural controls, the geological controls, and our mineralisation. So we gained a vast improvement in our understanding through doing this work. We also were allowed to drill a lot shallower holes. We're targeting and typically hitting the load within 100, 200 metres of target. rather than 500 odd meters. So yeah, it really was quite minimal, the cost to do it anyway, but we paid for it in the first few holes. The bottom line is also that working from underground in this particular part of the world is actually quite beneficial because you have a roof over your head. Literally, this drilling, we're just finishing off the drill program at the moment up there. We started in January. The week before, we literally had a metre of rainfall in 2 days up there. Proserpine was an inland ocean. Well, it had a real ocean to the east, but every other direction it had a map or an unnatural one, if you like. But once that subsided, we got in the rig and we've had no problems at all. And that's once again a great benefit of being able to operate there. Look, really, having done this work, it's been a really exciting, progression. Early in the piece from that underground drilling, we came to the realisation that our drill intersections of where we're seeing the mineralised lode weren't lining up particularly well with the old workings. There was something strange going on, and by the time we finished that next program, it became very clear to us that there was actually the mine had been the lode in the mine had been displaced. Throwing it up, fortunately for us, very close, not far from the old mine anyway. But yeah, we can even see there'd been a lot of speculation about why the guys had finished mining this thing, given the grades at level 7. That some people have told us that it got too much water and they couldn't basically manage it, and that was the reason. Some people said it was bad management and the company went broke and they didn't manage it and it just stopped. And other people said it just got pinched out or faulted out. I think our work is really showing very clearly that it has been faulted out, but fortunately for us, it's been thrown up and it's not very far away from the existing mine. The beauty of that is that now with the access, we've been able to drill, and we've basically hopefully got the bigger half of this, of one of the highest grade gold mines in Australia is sitting literally right here. It also has very attractive copper and silver and other things with it, business as well. There are some really impressive results. I mean, some of the results, and that's one of the headlines, is 4.3 meters at almost an ounce gold, at 0.8 copper and 11 grams silver, and within that there's 2.25 meters at 55 grams gold, 21 grams silver, and 1.5% copper. Look, we were the results of that initial program from underground really have just gave us the encouragement to go through, and now we're undertaking a far larger program to try and better understand the opportunity we have here. If we look at a long section through here, at this stage we've completed 24 holes for a bit over 5,000 meters. One thing that's very pleasing with our work is in this displaced lode, the model is working beautifully. We're invariably hitting it within a metre of where we expect to hit it. We keep hitting reasonable zones of quartz veining plus sulfide mineralisation. It does pinch and swell, but typically we are seeing a true width of about 2 meters, which is once again an interesting point about this mine, that once again, while they talk about these outrageously large grades in this area, the reality is the old timers invariably always handpick their ore, and they throw back and they just keep the main lode. The main lode itself here, the main vein, is typically 10 to 15 centimeters wide, and it's quite distinctive, and you generally pick it pretty easily with every hole we do. But the exciting thing from our drilling that we're seeing is that invariably within that shear zone, there's a larger shear zone, and there's a series of other little veins in there of similar style, and they often have some very significant grade with them as well. So we think, we're looking pretty good for finding ourselves something quite exciting in this area. And there's a lot more exciting work to be done. Stepping out a little bit further, the other thing that's come from the work we're doing out in this area beyond the actual mine itself, there's a whole series of historic mines through here. And if you look at some of the grades of some of them, Lockney average 567 grams per tonne historic grade. Young Crusade 120. Scorpion 335 grams per tonne. It just goes on. And most of these, that's the only idea of what we know about the grade. There's no publicly available information of rock chip results to back this up or define it. We've gone out there and started a serious program of field work. We're getting rock chips up to 540 grams and up to 3% copper in these areas. It's very clear to us that there's a pretty major structural corridor running through here, but there's also a number of these cross-cutting structures, which once again, we haven't really spent a lot of time on, but we are fascinated with what's going to happen at those intersections of these structures. Once again, drawing on my experiences from over in Fiji and Vaticola, the shatter zones tend to be where you get the intersection of big structures, and they are where you get the big deposits. So we certainly are keen to go and evaluate those, and there's a big program planned for this year once it stops raining. Moving a bit further south than what we have here, further south, it's interesting. In this area, we're really targeting the granite contact, a granite contact with the Camilla beds, which is a sedimentary volcanic sequence. But as we move further south, that's all been unroofed, and we're down to the Urana igneous complex, which is a deeper granite intrusive suite. And down there, it's interesting that we start to see a slightly different style of mineralization. Where up here, we're typically seeing these more discrete high-grade veins. As we get down there are porphyry copper systems that were recognised by MIM and CRA in the 70s down there. Jubilon Creek being just off our ground being probably the best example, but we also have one called Andromache on ours, which is a porphyry copper. And then on top of that, there's also a whole series of stockwork quartz vein mineralisation systems that are quite extensive. We also see flow domes. We see these sort of nested intrusives with really big alteration systems. There's some really interesting things down there. So that also gives us some excitement about what might be below what we're seeing here at Dittmer as well. Here's a cartoony little model that we've developed for the area. And basically that's what I'm saying. At the moment, where we're working up at Dittmer is up in this area. We've got the Camilla beds here, the Permian sequence of sediments and volcanics. There's this granite unit, the Hecate granite, which is punched up through here. But sitting up through it, we also have all these other little lake intrusives running through the place. At Moon, we see a rhyolite flow dome with breccias around it. At Golden Treasure, we see this nested intrusive, all these different type intrusive styles sitting through it. And there's some astonishing gold came up there. There's a huge area of alluvial mining through this area. Cedar Ridge, we see a stockwork vein system through there over a quite extensive area, which sits on a floodplain, and we only see it where it pokes out in ridges in a very big circular feature. We see in the magnetics, which is hidden under recent cover. And then Andromache, we see a porphyry. We go a bit further to the west. Mount Carlin sits about 80 kilometres to the west of a slightly different terrain, but it's in Lizzie Creek Formation, but it is basically a very similar, part of the story, I think. So look, next steps. At the moment, we're going to finish this drilling. We've already started making preparations for some concept studies to try and understand better how we can take this thing forward. While our main focus remains looking for the big one here, we see an opportunity for a quick, easy win in the actual Dittmer mine itself. We've got an existing mining lease there with some already some very encouraging results, and there's a real opportunity there. So we are hoping to finish our drill out and come up with a resource estimation for that. We're already starting to pull together samples for met test work to see how it performs. And obviously we're also going to look at options for where we could take this material to get it processed. Beyond that, there's some really big plans for our surface exploration in this area. We are looking at mapping, soil sampling, and an airborne geophysics survey over this area. We see a real opportunity for a low-cost, rapid startup of a project here that will hopefully bankroll our exploration for a number of years. Next, I'm going to talk about just a few anecdotal, observations about geochemistry from our work. If we look at the available open file data that we see, look, we're absolutely blessed in Australia and Queensland to have some amazing data sets available to us through the open file data system. Yeah, the fact that we don't have to pay for it, it's there online, it's digital, so it's very easy to use and access, and we're very, very fortunate, but it obviously always has its limitations. We have significant gaps in our data in both our Rediscovering and Dittmer projects in particular. We're very lucky at Ravenswood. We've got very good coverage through this area, but not so much in these. When we first picked up Rediscovering, I was surprised that 2/3 of our tenement had never even had a stream sediment sample collected on it, and yet we were literally sitting on the doorstep of Chilligo. Dittmer is arguably worse. It's apart from a few little areas around some of the historic mines and a bit of work, probably more on the western side, completed by CRA and MIM in the 70s, looking for porphyry copper systems. It's really had very little work. Just as a bit of a warning about the risks when you use this data, though, is something that came up last year for us. We were down doing some work at Andromache down south of Dittmer, looking around that porphyry target. And there was a set of really impressive rock chip results located a few kilometres north of there. The effort just to get into this area in the terrain where it is was quite a trek, let's just say, to get in there. And very disappointingly, we got there and we found absolutely nothing to explain these rock chips. We could not locate them at all. So we went back to the original source data, and lo and behold, we recognised that that it was mislocated, and they were actually part of the gap workings, which we already knew and could access quite easily. So that led to us going back to all our original data in this area and recompiling it, re-registering all our maps and locating our own data. Several things came out of that. We found a lot of gaps in the data. There was additional data that hadn't made the open file material. There was inconsistent units being used, sometimes particularly for gold, ppb and ppm. You get very excited when you get that 100 grammer, and then you find out, no, it's actually ppb, and that happens also rock chips as well. And then the other thing is, we just, say locations. We found sampling that was actually mislocated by almost 2 kilometres. So these are things that we need to be aware of when we take it. That it's a great starting point, but you probably should always go back to it. And it's fair to say we now have a protocol in Ballymore that we will, all our projects, we go back to all the core data, source data. It's a wet season job, but we do go back. And the benefit of doing this, though, is we've actually identified a number of really exciting targets. Look, it's fair to say that probably one of the main driving models that we're using these days, like many other people in North Queensland, is the intrusive-related gold system model. It's not just for gold, though. We find that, we've got a lot of porphyry-style base metal material, and there's a continuum there of these sort of style things. Look, this is a prolific area for these style things, and once again, our understanding of those has leapt forward in the last 20 years, and there's a real opportunity for more things to be found. Some great work by guys like Greg Morrison and everything have really assisted us in getting a better understanding of these. And obviously, we're using these models and these zonations we can see in geochemistry to help us to vector into where we want to be to find these things. And it's certainly playing a role in our approach. Here's just a really quick example of the sort of, an example of it. This is our 70-mile Mount Matthews Pinnacle area, which is literally 5 kilometres away from Mount Wright. It's probably one of the biggest polymetallic geochem anomalies in the Charters Towers region. We have a large copper anomaly. That's the pinks are over 200 ppm. It's also got a large zinc and lead anomaly sitting in there. There's also some very elevated, though more structurally controlled, it seems, moly hits in this area, but they also sort of sit in this area. And we also have some elevated tungsten that's associated, classical RGS system. And then once again, our gold is actually, generally a peripheral to that, and that's what we see. So look, it's a really, there's some fantastic applications for this, and we really, find it a very valuable thing to use. The other thing that really is coming into its own these days, I used to think we were absolutely amazing in the 90s with MIM because we analysed for 9 elements, including gold being one of them. And I think it was copper, lead, zinc, bismuth, vanadium, arsenic. I can't remember the last one, antimony. But beyond those, these days, I first got to use 50 element data actually when I was working in Serbia. And we analysed the Timok magmatic complex. We had a large chunk of that, and we did a massive program. It cost us a couple of $1 million, but we did 50 elements over the whole thing. And the data sets we created from that were off the charts. They were amazing. We could see, we could map alteration, we could map rock types, we could map halos, and it really opened my eyes to what the possibilities were. And having come back from overseas from there, I've never ever considered not analysing everything to 50 elements, whether it's drilling, soils, rock chips, it all gets done. The beauty of it is that it does help you to recognise that what are the pathfinders. We hopefully start to recognise halos and things which then we can apply to other areas. And the other thing is, in this new, rapidly changing world we're in, it also is helping us to recognise some of these critical minerals that we'd never even thought of before. I won't harp on it, but it's fair to say that the Rediscovering area in Chiligo pretty well has the whole periodic table in it. And there's some pretty impressive numbers and a number of things there. We've got bismuth up to 0.68, we've got copper up to 32%. We have lead up to 18.2%, tungsten up to 5%, zinc up to 14.45%. And look, there's a whole host of things. Ravenswood, we also see elevated antimony, gold, lead, and silver up to 7,000 ppm. Dittmer is more your classical bismuth, copper, gold, silver, and then Mount Wright, the VMS, is typically just a copper, silver, zinc target. Right, now I'm going to go where people fear to tread more often than not, the geophysics. Look, geophysics is a fantastic tool and we use it every day. I want to emphasize that geophysics is critical, but needs to be applied with a geological context. People going in there chasing red dots without applying that geological context are often doomed to fail or make some horrible mistakes. But the beauty of it, there's many things we can do with it. Undercover, the magnetics helps you to map, hopefully help you to map your structure and your geology. Magnetic units, we use 3D modeling of our geophysics data sets regularly and just helping understand orientations and where things sit and what they do at depth is also very useful. Mapping structure and alteration is something you can do really exceptionally well with these things. And then once again, with the EM and IP systems, you can go and start mapping your sulfides, whether they're massive or semi-massive or disseminated. So they all play a very valuable role for us. In terms of our open file data, it's very much the same story as what we see. Charters Towers, we have exceptional coverage of magnetics, gravity, EM, IP. We have a lot of really great data sets, but less so both Rediscovering and Dittmer. Our geophysicist tells me regularly that our Dittmer area has some of the worst airborne magnetic coverage in the state. Much of it is at 800 metre line spacing. A lot of it's at 400, and that's about as good as it gets. Look, it's great for mapping the deep sea of things, but what we're chasing at the moment is we're looking for structure. We want detail, and we want to be able to find it. So we clearly have to go back and do that. We are only a small company. We unfortunately don't have the resources to go and fly the whole region, but the whole region, I believe, is a very exciting opportunity for intrusive-related systems, and one that hasn't really had any work done on it. So we'll go back there. Once again, as a matter of course, with our work, we always go and remodel any geophysics data we have, and we create our own data sets for those. We 3D model it where we can, and where we have to, we generally do complete magnetic surveys and IP surveys. Here's one I prepared earlier. This is an example of our Rediscovering survey. The original survey, I think, was at 400 metre line spacing, and this is what happens when you close it into 50. You can see very clearly, basically Rediscovering with the mine sits on the edge of an intrusive body, and it sits on that edge, and you can see it's basically a bit of a demag sort of alteration zone sitting around there. But you can also see some spectacular structure that comes out of it, and once again, you start following up these structures, and lo and behold, you find more copper mineralization. It's a really, really fantastic tool, and something that we need more of. Last but not least, I'll talk about the geology. I bang on about this all the time. No matter what we think is our biggest gap in our data sets, geology is invariably the worst. We're always struggling with geology because it's an imperfect exposure we have of the stuff. It's very much in the mind of crazy geologists and what they put down on maps, what we end up with, and so we always need to improve our geology. And I think there's some real opportunities to be gained. When everything else is setting you down the wrong track, it's the truth is out there, and it's basically the geology will lead you to the path of righteousness. Here's just going back to Charters Towers. Mount Wright in the 90s, as I say, it was the biggest gold mine in Australia. It wasn't in Western Australia. This was our biggest mine. It produced over 100 tons of gold. Very exciting thing. It sits on what they call the Mount Wright corridor, which is what our tenement package basically is targeting. As you can see, even a few k's away, we've got a series of interesting targets. Matthew's Pinnacle is this large circular feature with a ring dike around it, and it's a big hydrothermal breccia in the middle. Middle Mount and 71 Mount are hydrothermal breccia systems, and then interestingly, at Pinnacle Creek, we also have a set of veins, which is arguably sitting above an intrusive as well. This is an area of great interest to us. Just looking at it a bit closer, there was a pretty obvious reason, and look, we certainly weren't the first to recognise this, but Mount Wright is this great polymetallic geochemical anomaly. It's got large alteration. We see remnant magnetics of reverse polarized intrusives in this area, which happen to coincide with the age of of a lot of our mineralization in the Ravenswood Charters Towers area. And lo and behold, we see exactly the same thing sitting in this area. So it's a really interesting opportunity to go in there, and we're really, it's one of the first places we went off and mapped. I won't go into a lot of detail about the geology, apart from saying one thing that left out of this very early in the piece was that 70 Mile Mount, beautiful conical hill breccia, hydrothermal breccia system. The whole hill's a breccia. But when we went in there and started mapping it in detail, we recognised there were actually two phases of breccia. And interesting, on the northern edge, there was this arcuate zone of a much more energetic polymictic breccia. Bulk of it was just a granodiorite that's been smashed up, and it's generally just a crackle breccia. You get into that area and you start finding volcanics, sediments, and all sorts of clasts sitting within it. Once we understood that, it suddenly also made a lot of other work that had been done previously make a lot more sense. All of a sudden, all the grades that we're seeing in the drilling, which invariably actually were in a bit of a, they weren't in a linear zone or anything, and our brains do struggle with that. But once you recognise the second breccia, it was abundantly clear that the gold was sitting in this breccia. So that was a fantastic recognition. This has a lot of similarities with Mount Wright, where once again Mount Wright is a breccia pipe, but the main mineralisation sits on one margin of that breccia, and there's a 1 million ounce deposit sitting in there. The beauty of these breccia systems is that they've got a lot of verticality to them, so the surface expression doesn't have to be big for them to be substantial gold deposits. Historically, there's been a lot of holes, but most of them are actually shallow holes, because most of them were people drilling into the middle of the breccia pipe. So they were collared on the edge where this breccia happens to be. They only drilled through it in the top little part. But interestingly, they got all these little nice little hits, and there was quite a few quite respectable results out there. 87 at 0.8, and 26.3, 40.3. Lots of little low grade things sitting down there. But we rolled out and moved around to test where there was more of a gap in that drilling on that same breccia to see if it held true as if you moved away from where the old drilling and tested it. And our drilling came back very pleasingly. Our first hole came back with 40 metres at a gram from 46 metres. The next hole came back at 15 at a half a gram. These are really pleasing results given they're shallow. The other thing about it is that it's very clear that deeper drilling has been completed has reported probably your better grades, and things like 28 metres at almost 3 grams per tonne, 8 metres at 6, and things like that. And so, there's a very large volume of this breccia that remains untested, and that's our next port of call, is go and test that. And all this came from a geological target. Just very quickly, another example from that Charles Towers area, the Daydawn area. Once again sits in that Mount Lation corridor. Interestingly, the guys, when they had Mount Lation, did a very good soil sampling program out to about here, basically covering the whole thing. So it's an amazing data set. Similarly, there's a mine called Hadley Castle that sits in here, and they also did a reasonable job. Intriguingly, between these two data sets, there's about a 2-kilometre gap. Ironically, we came across this Daydawn area, ironically walking to another place because we couldn't get through a fence, or we couldn't find a gate. So we had to walk to this prospect, and we're hiking along, and we got to this area and went, gee, there's a lot of quartz here. We started finding veins. We took some rock chips, got some decent results. We went back and mapped it. We found a 1.4 kilometre by 1 kilometre area of quartz veining through there. The other thing that's interesting that came out of those results is that we got some really quite spectacular silver with them. We're getting rock chips such as 127.5 grams gold, 708 grams silver, and 2.8% lead. 71.8 grams gold, 1,460 grams silver, and 2.7% lead. 50.3 grams gold, 7,100 grams silver, and 9.4% lead. This area, as I say, it's never been drilled, and it just was a gap. And by walking the ground and getting out there, we found this thing. It's quite recessive, so we completed an IP survey. That worked very well. Undercover, we're starting to recognise these low resistivity extensions to the known lodes we've mapped. It's clear that it extends, and it's probably a bit bigger than we appreciate. We're gearing up to drill that later this year. Last but not least, before I get off the geology bandwagon, is the Ruddy Gore area itself. When we went out there and mapped it, the original plan was to go and map the old line. Started to map it, and we started to recognise there were these later intrusives that were punching up into the main granitoid body there. And there was quite a lot of sericite and chloride alteration through this area. So we started to step out and continue to grow it. And by the time we finished, we'd come up with a much larger system than just the mine itself. It was quite interesting. So we hadn't even done soil sampling at the stage, so we planned a soil program to cover this area. And once again, it showed a very large annular geochemical anomaly with a number of polymetallic anomaly. So then we completed an IP survey over the greater area, and once again it did a fantastic job of basically mapping what the alteration showed. Sadly, to date, we've only focused our initial drill program on the actual mine itself. It just was too compelling a target to chase, and we got some quite respectable results: 86 meters at 0.5% copper and 11 grams silver from 4 meters. There's potential for a very significant shallow copper target right here, and we will go back and drill that. Ironically, we ignored the strongest and the best part of the IP anomaly because we were focusing on the mine, and that needs to go back and be tested. We think there's a really exciting target here, and it's far more. This is clearly a bigger system than just that little the workings around the historic mine itself. Just running through quickly some other opportunities in this area. The work that we're learning from Dittmer is that there's some pretty exciting things. We've basically got some very substantial, once again, channel sampling showing we've got some substantial grade within pillars in the old mine itself. And our drilling is also showing significant extensions to the lode out beyond where they stopped mining. It obviously pinched out, but it seems to be really, we're finding it with drilling out beyond it. Other opportunities out there, there's backfill. As I say, the old timers threw back what they rejected, but what they rejected then is very attractive to us. And in places I've been before, backfill is often referred to as high grade. And that remains the case here. Our own sampling from this suggests that we've taken about 32 samples of backfill material in the mine. The lowest grade we've got is 4 grams per tonne. The highest is 81.7 grams per tonne, and the median is 7. So there is actually potentially a substantial resource just right there in the backfill. Tailings is another thing. There is a small tailings dam out of that Torpy's silver lead mine. And once again, this mine was historically mined in the early 1900s. It's not a huge tailings. It's certainly no Mount Isa tailings dam, but it is impressive that sampling of the tailings has reported results up to 7.39% lead, 1.65% zinc, and almost 200 grams silver. We are also, obviously, like everyone else, we're looking at critical minerals. There is a very exciting opportunity here. We've got there's obviously immense growth expected in this in the long term. The issue and the challenge that we all have is the fact that there's so little information to inform our decisions on where we go. So we in ourselves are hoping we'll stumble across something in the process of doing the systematic multi-element work that we're doing. I think it's fair to say at the moment that while they're growing, they are still a very small part of our I guess production story on an annual basis. In terms of revenue on an annual basis with the critical minerals, copper is without doubt almost half of it. And then you've got your nickels, your zincs, your silver, lithiums. But these are no doubt going to grow. But there is always a risk from a small company point of view about getting into something, because there is always the possibility that someone's going to find a mine next week, which is going to basically destroy the market for that. They're going to cover it, or they're going to at least destroy the value in it. We see as though some really positive, exciting opportunities here, and we're very keen about it. Probably to date, the key things that we've seen in terms of those that really stand out in ours are we've got some exceptionally high-grade copper results, some exceptionally high silver results in all our licenses, some really exciting tungsten and moly up near Chiligo, and also zinc. I'll very rapidly talk about the challenges. I mean, the world is a challenging place. It's getting harder and harder to operate and do work. Mining has done itself no favours in selling itself as an industry, and we need to do a better job of it. The not in my backyard movement is growing and getting stronger everywhere, and including here. We are lucky though; we are in a stable environment with a place, and it's not as crazy as we haven't at least yet had the lithium industry nationalised by our country like other places, and there are some great opportunities still to go there, but we need to do a better job as an industry. Land access proves to always be a challenge. We're very fortunate that we have some of the most wonderful landowners. So we're absolutely blessed with the guys we have, but I will say it's fair to say that I'm pretty certain they all coordinate their mustering for when I want to come on and do field work. But anyway, they are lovely people. What I'm finding experience-wise with native title groups and getting clearances is that they are woefully under-resourced, and that's one of their great challenges, particularly since COVID, where everyone's trying to make up ground after COVID, and so there's a lot of work. Everyone's banging on their door trying to get clearances, and they just don't have the people for it. So you have to always assume that it literally takes sometimes 6 months to get a clearance. So that is always a bit of a problem. Similarly, since COVID, staffing and getting contractors has always been a bit of a pain. And then the ultimate complaint of every single junior company who's screaming out to get the results so they can announce it to the market is lab turnaround time. It has been diabolical. It is getting better, but it still remains a great problem for us. So look, that's my talk. In summary, I still think there's some exceptional potential in Queensland. I'm just so excited about the opportunities that remain here. I think it's remarkably still underexplored for the opportunity here. Most of these places I've talked about, if they were in Western Australia, they'd all have like 20, 30 holes in them without even blinking. There's numerous mines and things that just simply haven't had the work done on them. I think our greatest gap still remains geology. But I think it's a really exciting world we're living in as we develop with these new models and new technologies that we're bringing in and what they can actually bring to the table for us. I think critical minerals are a really exciting additional part of the story. There's real data gaps in there, but I think we're going to see a revolution in the next 10 years. And as more of that data comes in and we gain greater understanding of these, there's going to be some amazing discoveries. And look, I'm just firmly of the belief that the best days are well in front of us here in North Queensland. Thank you. Geez, sorry.
Thanks very much, David. We've got time for some questions now.
As a great talk, I'm not a geologist, so at the beginning you apologised for not giving a terrible example. For me, it was great. It's most of it. So a little whimsical question for you. I've lost track of the number of times you used the word excited or exciting. Do you have to be easily excitable to be a successful exploration geologist?
Well, I don't know. Tom will tell you I am an excitable person. It's fair to say. I think it helps. I've always said when I'm employing people, I don't want the smartest guy because they're going to be the one questioning what the hell am I doing out here. You want that guy who's absolutely buggered at the end of the day. Who's going to look and go, I wonder what's at the top of that hill. So yeah, they're the things that we need. But I think enthusiasm certainly helps. Having a thick skin and not being deterred by failure, because our whole job is based on more often not failing. But it's every now and then getting lucky and finding something coming off. And very often I use this all the time as well. We often do most of the right things for the wrong reasons and the wrong things for the right reasons. And it's because we are working in a data poor environment with so much of what we do. We work on assumptions that are often flawed and incorrect. And so the opportunity to get in there and do these things and not be deterred when something doesn't work, but hopefully learn from our failures and get better.
We have a question from online as well, which you answered in part, but I think we'll expand the scope of the question. Is at Dittmer there is historic tailings. Have you looked at possible resource in the tailings? I think if you expand the Rediscovering, as you said.
Well, Rediscovering is something, but I'm not sure who that is. I hope it's not Andrew Gilbert. We do actually have tailings at Dittmer as well, and we've actually started looking at that as well. And there's gold in the tailings there. It's once again, the reality is it was a small mine, and most of it was thrown back into the mine, and so the actual tailings is not huge, and only a fraction of what actually was produced that was actually produced on site. Most of it was sent to Chillago or even down to South Australia for processing. So the reality is there isn't a lot there, but it's something that we certainly are keen on. I think the greater opportunity here is the backfill. Once again, if there's, I think there's a prospectus that came out in 1950 for this mine that talked about 150,000 or 142,000 tonnes of backfill material. And I think they even threw around a grade of 10 grams per tonne. I mean, that in itself is, for a small company like us, is a very, very attractive proposition potentially if we reopen it, particularly in conjunction with the recognition of this displaced load. But the tailings is something that, it's interesting, and it's certainly got some significant grade with it, but it's not particularly large.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much, David. If you could all please join me in thanking David A-Izzeddin. Thank you. So coming up next week, we have Dr. Richard Lilly from the University of Adelaide talking about the future of geoscience education and an introduction to the Nexus program. We hope to see you all again next week. Thank you very much.